Yesterday, I was joined by the titans of investment. Today, I am joined by the titans of news. A most important subject, a very upbeat question we're going to be discussing for the next 40 minutes. Is trusted independent news dying? Cripes. It's a very big question, very important question. I've been in this industry over 30 years. I remember when I was a kid, the first 24-hour news channels. Sky, of course, here was the first CNN in the US. I remember the internet arriving. I remember social media, of course, arriving, and I think the next challenge is going to be AI. And very frankly, I'm not convinced when it comes to the internet and social media that our industry, and by that I mean not only the public service broadcasters, but the whole UK media, news media, has been very good at navigating new challenges. So maybe we'll do rather better with AI than we've done with social media. But Deborah, David, and Rachel, there are not three bigger brains in news in the world. So the next 40 minutes are going to be absolutely superb and non-boring. David, before I ask you that key question, is independent, trusted news dying? A little celebration, I believe, for you. You've taken the citizenship test for the UK. You are, let me share with you who don't know David, an American, another one. And I believe you passed with flying colours.
Well, you don't learn whether you passed. You don't learn how much you passed by. You just learn that you passed or you failed.
What was the toughest question? And can we answer it?
Yeah, actually, we'll just put it to the floor. So the toughest question for me, at least, maybe it wasn't for the other people in the test center in Watford, was where did Charles II hide from Oliver Cromwell's army?
Luckily, I know the answer to that, but won't be telling you.
All right.
Anyone know?
Who knows?
Oh, look at that.
An oak tree.
An oak tree was the right answer.
Did you get it right?
Did you get it right, David?
I got it right, but I got it right because the tube stop Royal Oak is named for a pub nearby, which has a sign up which says that it's named for
Doesn't
that
matter
oak.
why, you just got it right.
Brilliant. Okay. Sorry,
But that's why.
Slight diversion, sorry.
And
I've lost
also,
control
Deborah,
of the
I wasn't going to
panel
mention one. I was not going to mention a question I didn't get right.
But that's
Okay.
Right, David. Right. Well done. Congratulations. You've got a bounce in your step.
Thanks.
Until at least we get the next government, you're very happy to remain here. Is trusted independent news dying?
No. And you, Kamal, said you've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing this for 30 years. And so for more than half my life, people have been saying it's over, it's dying, it's going out of business. It's shape-shifting is what it is. And it's been shape-shifting those entire 30 years. There's always technology transitions. And yes, people said there's not going to be a need for all these news channels. There's not going to be a need for multiple different outlets. There's not going to be a need for 24 hours. There's not going to be a need for all this. There's always a need for it. And I don't think it's dying. I actually think it's thriving.
I'd like to frame the question, Dave, before I come to you, Deborah, slightly differently. So, is trusted independent news dying? I think there's two ways of looking like that. There's the supply side, i.e., are we doing our jobs? Are you doing your jobs in a way that your audience want? And there's also a demand side. Do people want trusted independent news, or do they just want points of view that they agree with? That could be the challenge. It's not actually that you're not any good at providing it. David, it's still for you. I'm going to come to you, Deborah, in a second. David, still for you. That they don't want trusted independent news. They want their opinions supported.
Well, especially for Sky, the trust that we have has to derive from the audience. And that's actually, I would submit, where every broadcaster, however you're providing the news you're providing, where it comes from. Is that ultimately you're only independent or trusted if the audience trust you and view you as independent. So wherever I've worked, and I've worked at a real diversity of places, ultimately the audience is who's programming this. And I think actually the trust factor, as it applies to big brands like Sky and any other brand, is different, and that has shifted. So we have the audience we have, but to the degree that we go out and recruit new audiences, often today, the trust is conferred on an individual creator, and the individual creator being associated with us, that confers that prestige on us, which is different from when many of us got in the business, when that you were on a big brand and you were chosen to present something on a night and at a time was why you were trusted. So look, it's why in how we present products now, I mean, we have a new morning proposition coming from Sophie Ridge and Wilfred Frost, and we're putting them out as that's sort of setting out our stall, watch them. And we think that'll confer something on us. But that is different than it was a generation ago when that this program was on at a particular time on a particular broadcaster was the value proposition.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Deborah, let me come to you, but I just want to, so we're going to have some slides through this session. We have the wonderful RTS bursary students here in the audience, and they were there last night, and I spoke to a couple of them, about 30 of them, and we've asked them about their news consumption. A lovely group of people, possibly not representative of the whole country, but nevertheless, they're here and welcome to them. But I just want to bring up the first slide, Deborah, before I come to you, which is from the bursary students, about 30 of them. Where do you get your news from? And it is heartening, I've always thought, having this 30-year career in news, when you see that the top 3 are represented on the stage here. Obviously, Rachel, you make news for ITV, as well as you've got other brands there, Channel 4. Sadly, I don't think any of you seem to watch Channel 5 News, bursary students. You need to, start tuning into that. Debbie Ramsey, brilliant editor. But anyway, Deborah, that does take from this question that actually no, that the BBC, ITV, Sky, etc. are still very much where people go for their news.
Yeah, look, I think we're here to discuss how do we grow from here, and at BBC News, I'm super proud and humble, to be honest, is to see that slide. It affirms what we see in our data, and when we listen to our audiences, we are a growth story. We are growing. We have more than 2/3 of UK adults, 3/4, sorry, come to BBC News every single week. We have overtaken Apple in the last year with the #1 news app in the UK, despite the Apple app being pre-installed. We've actually grown trust in a period where we've had the UK election and the US election. And I think what it's about, as David said, whether you call it shape-shifting or disrupting ourselves, it's because we've got new offers on the table that carry as a vessel our trusted journalism. So whether that's live pages or live streams or the work we're doing on social platforms, we're out there disrupting, innovating, working to give our audiences what they need where they are. But what's inside the pipes that reach them on those platforms is that the certainty of the trusted news provision. And yesterday on this stage, it was wonderful to hear the Secretary of State describe the BBC as light on the hill. And we carry that responsibility both domestically and globally, with a great deal of seriousness, and we are very proud of that. But we're humble about earning the trust of our audiences. And globally, we're reaching 500 million. We want to one day get to 1 billion, and that's our growth target. But we're doing it through really, really listening, through transparency, and through doing these new interventions in the market, like, say, an In-Depth, which is our digital analysis brand, or BBC Verify, which is now beginning to become a much more global brand, which is radically transparent, responding to that audience need. Audiences want us to open up and show them how we do our journalism. That's why we're not in retreat. That's why the answer to the question of this session is no, emphatically not, because we are restless.
But there will be criticisms of what the BBC does, and BBC News in particular, and we'll maybe get to some of those during this conversation. What are the challenges, given that very optimistic view you've just given us? What are the challenges that BBC News is facing when it comes to your different audiences, and that you are not loved in the same way by different audiences. Some audiences absolutely love you and are passionate about you. I would imagine there may be a broad multiplicity of the audience which think the BBC is an important thing and a bit more sort of, it's there, great, I sort of use it. And then you have quite an aggressive group of people who actively dislike the BBC and would attack you for that. How do you work with or think about or consider that group of people who are your critics?
I think it's such a great question. The place I start from is that the BBC is paid for by all the people, and the BBC must be for all the people. And that is about saying, how can we reflect the fragmentation of our politics, you know, the broader spectrum of political discussion and debate, which every single week seems to get wider. And we are here to report that, to reflect it, but not to judge it. And we're here to host that conversation and to be the UK's town square, if you like, where we can have those conversations and hopefully to do so in you know, agreeable disagreement. And that's our job. And one of the things that we've started to do much more, in fact, we launched something in the UK election that was so successful that we've continued it through. It was called Your Voice, Your Vote when we launched it. And now we call it Your Voice, Your BBC News. And it's where we are saying to our audiences all of the time, we want to work with you. You are our shareholders, you are our stakeholders, you pay for us. We are here to tell the stories that matter to you. We're here to reflect those issues that matter to you, not what the politicians want to talk about, what you want to talk about. And now, significant amounts of our content, like a piece we did last week on asylum hotels and HMOs, comes from Your Voice, Your BBC, and we're picking that up, and we're actually working in partnership with our audiences. And I think that's something you're going to see grow and grow and grow, as we want our audiences to understand we are here for you and we work for you.
Rachel, looking at that, as I say, there's a number of of your customers there that you produce news for. My assumption is that, like David, like Deborah, you do not believe trusted news is dying. Let's answer that first, but I also then want to get on the actual big thing in that slide is it's great that we can still see public service broadcast news is still vital to people's consumption of news, but social media is a big player in how people consume the news.
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute, and I would say it's and, not but.
Yeah.
But yes, in terms of the premise of this panel, I have to say that the whole conference, these 2 days, are about growth, and it's very positive. I found it a bit disheartening to find the news panel had to be so doom and gloom. And I think it's really easy to bash news, but we are a growth story, and across all of us, we are seeing innovation, we are seeing more and more content. ITN turns 70 next week, and I don't think we've ever made so much content as we do now. I almost feel that we're in this kind of peak content era where linear still really matters. So, some of our linear audiences are going up on Channel 4 and Channel 5. That's volume, not just share. There is that thirst for knowledge via those sources, particularly in an era of Trump or big stories. So people are turning to it. But we also, as public service journalism, have to be everywhere. And that means all the different platforms. It means Substacks, it means podcasts. We're sort of at this peak time, I think, where we are stretched more than ever before, and perhaps more than we will be in the future. But that's exciting. It's about innovation. We've always innovated, as the others have. And it's just about thinking about audiences where they are and how they want it. So this doesn't dishearten me, because, yes, linear audiences, but also we are all making a load of content on TikTok, YouTube. Facebook is back up there again, Instagram. So when people say they're getting their news from there, they could well be getting their news from our our accounts, from our journalists on those social media platforms as well. So I think it's and, not but.
But as chief executive of ITN, you know that your budgets haven't kept pace with the amount of different platforms and products and content types you need to create. I mean, how wide can we stretch that piece of elastic before at the edges or even in the middle, you're not getting the same quality that maybe you could demand when you were producing far less content and products?
Yeah, it's tough. but that's just what you have to do. It's fine in terms of, I think you just approach it in a different way. Very often you'll either approach something as a story-centric, I think we're all story-centric now, whereas rather than thinking, what are we doing for News at 10, or how do we do a bit of something else around it, you think of a story and where it goes to different outlets. But also, and as you've been saying about the partnerships you've been doing with the audiences, fantastic journalism comes up through our digital teams, through our social teams, through what they're talking about with audiences. And that will then filter through to News at 10 or to Channel 4 News. So it all feeds itself as well, I think.
Deborah, what's your approach to off-platform? YouTube, Insta, TikTok. I mean, I was on the board of BBC News for 3 years. We always grappled with, we as the BBC then, obviously I'm not any longer, but the grapple was inside the BBC. Do we want everyone to come to the BBC and be on our control platform, still using that phrase, maybe once BBC, always BBC, who knows. Or do we go where the audience is, and particularly, as you say, Rachel, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook now coming back again, TikTok. How are you thinking about that off-platform strategy for BBC News?
I think the ecology has got to be both. I think we can no longer live in a world where we want every single person to come to our platform, because of course we want a relationship, we want to capture their data, we want to be able to personalise the feed that we're going to give them. Yes, we do want to do that, but we also need to go where the audience are, particularly the under 25s. I don't think there's a single person in this room who doesn't know that we have to challenge our sort of previously held convictions around our own platforms to go where they are. And indeed, I mean, one of the first things I actually did when I arrived at BBC News was to really invest quite heavily in TikTok, where now, every single week, it's an astonishing number, we reach nearly 3 million under 25s in the UK alone, which is really astonishing, and that's with BBC News content. And so we know we're building a relationship with those under 25s, and we can also bring them back to our own platforms where we can deepen that relationship. It's absolutely critical. On YouTube already, 40% of our audience are already under 25. We're going to grow that. We really are sort of going boldly in partnership with YouTube to really focus on growing what we're offering on our to audiences there, whilst also still innovating on our own platform, so that when they come back, and right now it's something it's a small thing, but I'm so proud of it. When you go onto the BBC News vertical video carousel, we're now doing lots and lots of vertical video. It can sit inside the live page or on its own right there. If you go on web, you can now scroll up. So we've got scrollable kind of infinite style video, which is we need for those audiences when we do bring them back to our platforms to have a user experience that is aligned with how they're consuming off our platform. So it's absolutely critical that we can offer them that experience when they come to us. And that's really, we're now moving forward at pace with that, and we're really excited.
Are you getting, okay, it's good that the BBC is on TikTok, I think far too slow, to be frank, before you realised how important that platform is. But are you getting the attribution from young people who are just scrolling past endless video? Do they know it's a BBC video? Do they know it's a Sky video? Do they know it's an ITN, customer of ITN video? Do you get the attribution? So
attribution is critical for all businesses, and particularly the BBC, because we know that when people understand, oh, this is a BBC piece of content, it will help build a relationship with them and perhaps drive willingness to pay the license fee later on. So we are measuring attribution, and what we've seen is that if we produce our content in certain ways with our logo and some of our brand attributes much more front and centre, surprise, we get higher levels of attribution. So we've actually managed to increase those over time, and we'll continue to learn, because it's absolutely critical, because we do know that the challenge of off-platform is that sometimes when asked, people will say, oh yeah, I saw that content on YouTube or on TikTok. They won't necessarily say that was BBC News content, but we are shifting it.
Yeah. Rachel, you obviously have a very different relationship with the audience, i.e. you go through your customers. In the main, you do have some of your own content on off-platform. What's your approach for you and your customers, and also for your own off-platform? So YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, how should news providers be thinking of those platforms?
Working in partnership, sometimes more productively than others, depending on the platform. And there's still relationships that are developing, I think, and a lot of the time it's been us trying to put the point about value, and value in terms of audiences, but also our PSB remit, effectively. And we have very constructive discussions with YouTube at times. Others are less constructive. But I think, we've talked about prominence, and Lisa and Andy's talked about it, and we've talked about prominence a lot, prominence for the PSBs. Particularly for us, there's something around prominence for trusted, impartial news within that as well. And with the Southport horrific incident was happening last summer, we were, you know how much mis and disinformation was going around, we were really pleased to see that Channel 4 News' coverage got to the top of the YouTube algorithm, because people needed to find it, and they need to know how to find that as easily as turning on the telly at the moment. But that is not guaranteed every single day.
They're unreliable boyfriends, aren't they, in the end? You just never know whether they're going to ghost you, whether they're going to love you up, whether they're going to leave you. Yeah. They just, I certainly, obviously, I've discussed this on this stage. Will Lewis and I started our own business 4 years ago, and understanding how the algorithm works was almost impossible. Isn't that one of the issues? Why is it dying? The distribution mechanism is not in our control any longer.
No, but I would point out, this isn't as me being protectionist about a business model, because that is not our business model. It's about serving audiences. And whilst we have that PSB remit, it is getting to them. So it is vital in that sense.
Yeah. David, how does Sky approach off-platform?
Well, first, just off this conversation, let's be honest. The news industry did have some failures in the navigation of two previous technology transitions. First, just the appearance of the internet in a popular way in the late 90s. Second, in Kamal, what you're describing, which is how it navigated its relationship with social media platforms in sort of Web 2.0. And the important thing now is to get right, or mostly right, this next technology transition, which is how AI is replacing keyword search to news with semantic search to news, which we think has some real opportunities for us, because semantic search emphasizes brand to a degree, emphasizes citation especially, and whether you're seen in other media becomes actually not just a bragging right, but a commercial imperative. And I think in order to bottom that out, we have to acknowledge that not all these platforms are the same as far as the commercial outcomes that we receive from them, the T's and C's, the viewer expectation. I think for Sky in particular, we've moved to sort of the top of the table of our own internal performance indicators, YouTube and TikTok, in terms of how we perform on there with monetizable video views, but also because these are really platforms. The way that linear television is a platform, and how you interact on those platforms with the audience that's available there is important. Those two, for us, have kind of a pride of place as far as what we get from them, both commercially and editorially. The others have their uses, but we sort of deal with them a little bit separately.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Dave. We'll get onto AI in a second. Can we just have the second slide, which is really a slide about what audiences expect. Poor old presenters. Yeah. I think we do like presenters, as you were saying, David. We do actually quite like our presenters, but yes, the bursary students, less excited by the presenters. But I think there's one point here, Deborah, I want to come to you about storytelling. I think one of the challenges for the news industry is, I think, a reasonable criticism of all of us on this panel, that we have a tendency to cover stories in a way that is familiar to us, and maybe the way that we've grown up in this great industry of news, and that we have not pushed ourselves enough to think about not only story choice, but style of telling the story. If I watch television news today, as I do, I can see all the DNA of television news from 30 years ago. Okay, of course it's modernized, it's a bit more slick, it's a bit more clever maybe, but it's basically the same foundational sort of structures. What are you doing, Deborah, at the BBC News, talking about growth, and it's good to remind everyone why we're here, to change that storytelling model?
Yeah, look, I think each way of consuming news has its own grammar. And I think that the broadcast model has not been, despite my best attempts over many
many different
years and
broadcasters,
yeah, I mean, it hasn't fully disrupted itself. But you know what? At the same time, broadcast audiences are really strong and stable, as Rachel said. I mean, we are still seeing really significant numbers of people come to our broadcast platforms. And also, what is broadcast and what is digital? Because the sort of Breakfast 1610 are massive on iPlayer. They are some of our best titles on iPlayer, and people are coming to them in a streaming environment to consume them. So you've got broadcast habits, yes, over here, and then you've got digital habits, digital forms of storytelling, and social forms of storytelling. And that mostly now lives in the realms of very short clips, often vertical, longer podcasts and conversations, and then live. Live works really, really well on social platforms, and young audiences really come in those live moments. But what is going to happen as the economic realities continue to mean that we are converging our production? So, recently at BBC News, we no longer have broadcast newsroom or digital teams and digital teams. They are one team together, integrated to make the content. That the direction of travel will mean that the means of storytelling on those digital and social platforms will come back into broadcast, because it's one news factory now, and you can no longer, at some point, afford to make all those TV news packages, and so those programs need to become more influenced, if you like, by the kind of content, and so they should, because audiences, we shouldn't think of social and digital audiences all being under 25 or under 35. You've got people in their 60s and 70s also consuming tons of vertical video. And creating new habits. So in a way, the danger for broadcast, as you're suggesting, is that it lags behind. And I think the disruption and the innovation we're doing does need to now wash back into that program.
I assume as well that, I don't know, if you have a really interesting podcast interview, that might then appear on the 10. And certainly that happens across Channel 4 and other places. It's not so rigid any longer. You were going to talk, I might come in again.
No, because if I could build on that about live, because I think live is really important, and you're saying that's part of the resilience of those broadcast formats, it's important in two ways. And the first is, there's been a lot of attention in the coverage of news media, and maybe it's what fed the sort of negative bias of the question, to the sort of crash and click-through rate to news articles, principally online. Our click-through rate actually has not crashed, but it's mostly to do with live. It's mostly to do with that when you put in a prompt in an AI, looking for an AI summary, it doesn't really correct for live. It doesn't really tell you what's going on right at this moment. And so the traffic on platform is largely sustained to that. The other thing is, as you look at particularly TikTok and YouTube, unlike a lot of our US competition, our live signal is available, the same live signal, on those platforms. Whereas when American broadcasters have committed that live signal to distributors, whether they're cable or broadcast television stations, they can't put that there. We can. And so it upranks Sky News results on all of those platforms, and that has a huge halo effect commercially.
Yeah. And now that you can alert people into a live feed. So we've got multiple live feeds, sometimes 3 or 4 at the same time, a live video feed, but you send up an alert and a notification and it pulls them in. So we can actually tell them something's happening using digital alert technology, which brings, I call it spike and surge.
Just be very careful when you're doing it from Glastonbury, and just keep control of who's saying what on stage, and you'll be great. Rachel.
I just...
That's a bit unfair, Deborah, sorry.
I would contest your question a bit.
Okay.
I mean, yes, if you're watching broadcast news, you might think, or linear broadcast news, that's still quite familiar. I think there's some fantastic storytelling going on from news teams right across the board. And maybe you're not seeing it. Maybe you're not on ITV's politics account on TikTok. Maybe you're not reading all the Substacks. Maybe you're not watching the reporter who's just gone and spent a day walking the streets to see what harassment she's subjected to. Maybe you're not seeing the road trip behind the scenes with a lot of Trump supporters in the election. I think it's brilliant. And I'm always encouraged, actually, by the wealth of storytelling. And it's not standard. It's not even all video. Channel 4 has done quite a lot of stuff with AI to really deep dive on data about are there enough nurses in your hospital, interactive, or sense-checking 1 million clips of things that Trump said against his pledges. That's innovative ways of storytelling across the board, and there's much more with you as well. And I think we should be quite proud of what we're doing.
Yeah, Good. Well, look, Rachel, that's me told. I'll make sure I watch this stuff much more aggressively. Now, the RTS bursary students weren't only surveyed before we came in here, but they're actually in here as well. And we want to take a couple of questions from some of those RTS bursary students, which will get us into some very, very important issues. Amar, I think, is in this direction here. Hello, Amar. Lovely. Welcome to the Cambridge Festival. Amar, do ask your question of the news titans.
Yes, so as seen with the coverage of recent events, both home and abroad, whether it's the riots that have been going on in the UK or events in Palestine and America, it's apparent to see that much of the mainstream news media is shaped by a hidden bias, or whether it's from a difference in language used or omission of the full story. If this is the case, does truly impartial journalism still exist? And how can broadcasters rebuild that trust in that reality?
So thank you, Amar, for the question. Deborah, obviously, you've had, it is very tough reporting on issues like Gaza. It is also difficult, not to the same degree, reporting on things like Unite the Kingdom March, because there are sets of audience that believe a position to be true and that the opposing position is untrue. How do you, as an impartial news broadcaster, consider impartiality in those incredibly contested situations? Is impartiality out of date as a concept that we grew up with 30, 40 years ago?
I think impartiality is needed now more than ever. I think that the BBC's role is the pursuit of truth with no agenda. And whereas I think over previous decades, pursuit of truth was the thing, now with no agenda is equally as important as the pursuit of truth itself. And that we can demonstrate to our audiences that we do not have an agenda. And when I first arrived at the BBC, we did some work with audiences to say, what would it take for you to trust us more? And they came back, and this is global audiences and UK audiences, and they came back with absolute clarity. Number one, they want the clarity. Number one, clarity in the chaos. Number two, courage to go to difficult places and bring back the story and ask difficult questions. And then it was fairness and respect. And fairness and respect together form impartiality. It's about reflecting the fullness of the political debate and the conversation, and to make no judgment on that. We're here to report, not to judge, and to listen to our audiences, and to keep sense-checking whether we are getting it right. And the fifth thing I wanted was transparency. And transparency is so important, and I hope to answer your question through perhaps the examples of BBC Verify. We take those contentious questions that you're talking about there, and we're saying, okay, what are the most vexed questions, those where we've got the most amounts of disinformation that we can see, and BBC Verify will go in and it will show our methodology, show our journalism, show our working, so that the audiences can see not just what we know, but how we know it, how we learnt it. And I push the team all the time to be as radically transparent, and I really mean radically transparent. And we've got to keep getting ahead of ourselves on that, because the audience expects it, they need it, and that's how they know they'll be able to trust us.
So I just ask, Amar, are you reassured by this idea of no agenda? All the young people I've worked with in my career, and a lot of the polling evidence, is that particularly younger audiences, or the next generation of consumers, do not believe there is such a thing as an organisation with no agenda. That doesn't exist.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I would say it's just the language that's used for different stories has a massive impact on the way we perceive it, right? Saying someone is dead, whether in comparison saying someone was killed, has a massive impact. And when we see that difference in the coverage of different news stories, it does make you think whether there is an agenda behind that or not.
Yeah. Rachel, can I come to you? But Deborah, let you respond. Sorry, go on. And then Rachel,
Thank you. I think one of the hardest things that we are contending with is the fact that not only are people consuming so much of their content in social media feeds where the algorithm is giving them more of what already confirms perhaps their own view of the world, but people will subscribe also to media feeds and brands which also probably support their view of the world. And that when people then meet an impartial source of news, it can feel like a challenge to their own values because they're not necessarily so accustomed to reading that. And I think that's something we really have to think about.
Yeah.
Can I jump in? I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly on impartiality, but take what you're saying very seriously, and we do listen to that feedback. I think for me, it underlines even more the importance of eyewitness journalism and going to the heart of a story and just talking to the people there. Why are you here? What do you think? And for example, I mean, it was four and a bit years ago now, but when Trump supporters were storming the Capitol, it was ITV News team that went in quite simply and just said, who are you? You know, what do you want? And that was very powerful reporting because it came with no agenda. And this is one of the most important things, I think, for all of us, is still having the funding, still having the budget to go and do eyewitness journalism and making sure that that rises to the fore. It's very frustrating we can't get everywhere we want to go. But being able to keep that up as a differentiator, I think hopefully leaves it to the audience to make their mind up rather than us.
Just some brief thoughts, David, and we'll then go to Harry, who's on the next question. But anything, David, on this issue of is impartiality itself out of date when people are thirsty for a point of view or simply don't believe that the opposite point of view is in any way justified and shouldn't be broadcast?
I don't think it's new that people want to be confirmed in their views. I think that the word that you used that is the most loaded is hidden, in the sense that everybody accepts that everyone has biases of their own. Are those biases transparent to the audience or not? And I think alleging that they're in some way hidden or that there's some sort of sub rosa conversation that's going on. Most of the most insidious, most of the most challenging controversies that I think any news organization ever confronts is the allegation that we withheld something that we knew. And so to the transparency point that Deborah makes, I think the bias that we have to have has to be to reveal things and not to conceal them. And that is something that's also shape-shifting, not just the commercial environment.
Great. Harry, is Harry there? Harry.
Hi, thanks for a really interesting panel so far. My question is also about impartiality, but it's specifically about whether you think that there's a conflict between your commitment to impartiality when it comes to reporting what's true, but also when it comes to kind of giving all politicians a fair hearing. What happens when politicians say things which are objectively untrue? Do you feel like you have the flexibility to call that out or not? And how do you kind of square that circle, I suppose?
Deborah.
That's one of our primary focuses and what we're here to do. It's to ask those difficult questions and to scrutinise politicians from whichever party they are from. And I think at the BBC, obviously, we've got platforms where we host discussion and debate, and we've got platforms where we really focus in on those questions, and that's what our presenters are there to do, and we proudly do it. And I think that is, in a time when political rhetoric is becoming heated, and language is being used that increases that polarization, I think it's for us to very calmly go in and very deliberately challenge, ask politicians to justify, challenge them with fact and data so that they have to be accountable for the things that they say.
Rachel?
No, absolutely agree with that. And we've always done it, but I think even more so having that knowledge and the data and the facts behind it all the way. But yes, we challenge, we will challenge. I have to say, I was really collectively proud of the British media more generally when Trump came back into power earlier this year, that everyone just made that extra space in their copy or their bulletins. It might be an extra 30 seconds in a live to say, Trump has said this, by the way, that is not factually accurate, and this is why, and these are... And it just, that became part of the news literacy, I suppose.
But we struggled the first time round, I felt.
Well, I think we learned.
2016, we struggled maybe with that.
We did, but I think this time around, particularly when he started, he came out with a whole load of clear policies, which were very easy to analyse, and as opposed to this sort of more general mush.
David, I'll bring you in for the next question. So just the final question, we've got a couple of minutes left from Sophia, who I hope is somewhere. Yes, great. Sophia.
Hi. So my question was that earlier on you were talking about how being represented in media is very important, and I wanted to ask how you think social media can positively impact people from underrepresented backgrounds, and why do you think diversity is important?
David. Has social media helped the industry actually become more diverse because the mechanisms of delivery, the mechanisms, Rachel, you were talking about storytelling, have necessarily had to change?
Yeah, the feedback loop is much faster. There is also a bit of a noise signal problem because sometimes the heat that you're receiving on a social platform about a particular story may be not necessarily in proportion to what the broad audience thinks. I mean, it definitely advantages passion, sort of favors passionate argument in many cases over what's really out there. But it is definitely a better mechanism than early days of these type of formats where, yeah, you were waiting for people to phone up the station, send a letter, you know. I mean, you still get letters? I do. They're not, you know, like, wow, got a letter. Like, nobody ever calls. Yeah. But yes, you do feel that much faster. Hopefully that does help on representation.
We're certainly right at the very end of our time, but Deborah, I just wanted you just to touch on, and both of you, just a couple of sentences on that diversity issue and how you ensure that you have a broadness of who it is you speak to and who is represented in your coverage, because the audience, like Sophia, are demanding it.
We're maniacal at the BBC about audience research and data and feedback, and I've never worked anywhere that gave as much attention and earnestly to what the audience is telling us. And so we understand where we need to work and where we need to pivot in order to represent our audiences, and we know who we need to work harder to reach.
Yeah. Rachel?
It's a part of every single editorial conversation. We discuss who's contributing to our programs and our content, and we debrief it instantly afterwards. It all gets reported up to me the next morning as well, so we're right across all of it. But also in terms of story choice, and that's why having a diverse range of staff is bringing us different stories. And I think social really helps on that, not just in terms of what stories people are liking or not, but we are getting eyes and ears on stories that we would not know about through traditional sources. So, sorry, very short answer. Happy to talk afterwards more.
Yes, come and speak to everyone afterwards. That's been a remarkable 40 minutes. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rachel, for that. Next, Darshini David will be talking to Baroness Shruti Vadera. Do stay here for that, but thank you to the news titans.